Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to be at the tail end of this exciting conference. First question I have actually for you, a little bit of audience participation. How many came to the conference today in a driverless car? You could raise your hand proudly. For those in the front, there's hundreds of people back there raising their hand if you're missing out. No. Actually, I haven't either. 5 years ago, I asked that question. It was quite a ridiculous question. It was an audience like this. And I posed that question: how many believe you will be in a driverless car in the next couple years? And there wasn't a single person, as you can imagine, that raised their hand. It's interesting. I've been personally watching this innovation. And with curiosity, I'm an engineer. And I've been looking at the innovations associated with driverless cars. And it's really quite interesting to watch, because I think the technology is not going to be the one that slows down the adoption. Instead, it's going to be policy and behaviors. The policy associated with, well, how do these devices, these cars, actually interact with the infrastructure that exists out there in our highway system? What about liability? What about human behavior associated with, do I really want to get in this thing? But I believe firmly that there's going to be a transformation in the transportation business because of this. I'm going to parallel that to medical wearables and smart devices now, because I'm going to draw the same conclusion. I'm already seeing the impact that these devices are having on our healthcare system. And very similar to driverless cars, we have a similar problem. Technology is further ahead than policy and behavior. But let's start at the beginning, in my mind, which is, what is the problem statement? This is not a big surprise to this conference. We have globally a challenge dealing with chronic disease. And then when you look outside, especially outside the borders of the westernized countries, access to healthcare in general is a challenge. So the question we have is, how can smart devices play a significant role in solving this dilemma? I believe the answer is it will, but it's going to require three key things: access, integration, and adoption. Access, integration, and adoption. I want to talk about those in the next few minutes. The first thing, I want to take you back to a completely different world. All right, 10 years ago, I traveled to Alaska. First time I've been to Alaska. If you haven't gone, it's an incredible place. And while I was there, we took the train up and we saw what was noted. It was the pathway that the miners took when they were looking for the gold rush in the late 1800s. When I came back, I did a little more research on this because I remembered faintly this in school, of course. And I found some interesting things. The first thing I found out was like 100,000. So what does 100,000 mean? 100,000 people actually decided to strike it rich. And they took off from either Seattle or San Francisco to go up to the Klondike, northern Canada, to find their riches. 30,000 actually made it to the Klondike that started. Interesting. Why did that work? Well, the Canadian government actually required a person to schlep around 2,000 pounds of supplies. And that was a barrier in itself. In fact, you see with this picture, why they're all going up and down this mountain is because they're carrying their supplies up and down. And finally, 4,000. 4,000 actually saw a speck of gold of the 30,000. The odds were not good. The entry fee to get started of the 100,000 that started was modest. But being able to be a winner here, to be the 4,000, required connecting the end-to-end points. Now, how is that possibly relevant to the world of wearables? So here's a perspective. Here's the gold rush. This is today, not the late 1800s, but a very similar phenomenon is occurring. I call it the gold rush for wearables. This is estimated to be a huge dollar figure. The $50 billion here is a study that was done. speculating this market to grow at an astronomical rate. The same with M Health. I was at CES this year, and I swear, no matter where I stopped at the CES floor in Vegas, I could throw a rock and hit 100 companies who were producing wearables. Why? It's the 100,000 people going on the Yukon Gold Rush. They see the opportunity. The question is, who are going to be the winners here, and what is success going to be depending upon? On the far right of this slide is something that this conference we've been talking about, which is patient compliance. Or you can say consumer compliance, perhaps, if it's a wearable. And the statistics you've heard quite a bit, where you see a tremendous drop-off after a very short period of time. And so this concept of adoption and compliance is a foundational problem that has to be solved in order for this actually to have a true effect. When I say a true effect in the healthcare system, we like to talk about the triple aim. Will it do one of three things, right? Will it improve patient satisfaction, reduce costs, or improve quality of care? Let me tell you about my story, my personal story. So on my wrist today, I do not have my Fitbit, but I used to have my Fitbit. I'm a partial Fitbit user, in fact. I will admit that. I will wear it during the wintertime, which is interesting. So here's my experience. So I, a couple years ago, was wearing the Fitbit every day, and it became a very competitive thing with my colleagues, and we were pacing each other on steps. And I was consistent about wearing my Fitbit. I started to monitor my sleep habits. It was telling me how many times I flipped over and got out of bed at night. So one morning I was down with my wife, and we were talking about, I was telling her all the great statistics, and she just frankly looked at me and said, I could have told you that. You didn't need a Fitbit to tell you that. And then she said something that was really, I could not answer. She said, well, what are you going to do with that information? And I said, you know what? I have not the foggiest idea. And shortly after, I quit wearing it, at least for bedtime. I wear it during the wintertime, though, because it's a reminder on my wrist that during the times when it's not easy to get outside, it's time for me to exercise. So there's some value there for sure. But this is really a foundational problem. And as we as industry look at deploying, designing, innovating in solutions that require wearables, this is a foundational problem we got to solve. Let's start moving now from, I call it the quantified self, represented by the hand here. We are measuring absolutely everything. I swear there's not a single thing we don't measure. And that's awesome. That's how we start, because we start collecting data. And that data now moves into the center part. That's phase 2. Phase 2 is information. Now I'm going to pause here and I'm going to tell you a story. I had a lot of conversations with family practice docs who are overwhelmed by wearables. They tell me the story that, you know what, Randy, I tell you, there's not just one patient that does this. They'll come in and they'll say, doctor, I've been collecting all this data from my wearable stuff, and here's all the paperwork. And they put it in front of them. And they say, tell me what's going on. And of course, the doctor I was talking to, he says, I kind of just kindly as I talk, I kind of just shove it to the side, and I move on to my normal processes. That information does not provide value in our current healthcare system under those conditions. But the question that we have to ask ourselves is, where does value creation happen? It's not about collecting it. It's not about moving it into a certain database. It's the final stage here, and that's represented in a graph here that says it's about the outcomes. It's about the relevancy of data, because frankly, if I look, I'm from the ultrasound business. Actually making an ultrasound image is not of any value except for actually getting either a measurement or the presence of something, because that's really the clinical question. Is there a lesion there? Is there a blockage there? If so, how big is it? It's about numbers, it's about information, it's about bringing those to bear. So this is really the challenge is the value of wearables and where we're headed is not in the value, it's not in measuring things, it's actually interpreting things. I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged by this information about BYOD. And this isn't, let me just put it in context. This is not consumer BYOD, diagnostic medicine, et cetera. This is a questionnaire that went out to clinicians asking some fundamental questions about the value add to BYOD in the context to mHealth and the different things that are being used with their smart devices. And this is really encouraging because it's telling me now that policy and behavior are beginning to close the gap. And what that also tells me then is adoption is going to be increasing. So this study talked about value of communicating with peers with smart devices, the value to access information on the medical record, reducing costs without wasting time. This is something that's exciting for me to see, and it's something that we started to process and think about at Philips, which led us to this product. And this is part of the ultrasound business. I want to share a little story here. We were seeking ways to improve access to ultrasound, diagnostic ultrasound. Now, ultrasound cannot be sold to consumers, so this is for clinical use of ultrasound. And some of the insights we had was a lot of folks were not using ultrasound because of some of the limitations in either cost, accessibility, complexity of the modality. Here's a classic picture, and actually this is a product called LumaPHI. It's the world's first app-based ultrasound. And why is that significant? Well, it's significant because if you start to look at the three things I talked about, access, integration, and adoption, it really was focused at trying to address those things with the intent to improve quality of care, reduce cost, and patient satisfaction. So actually what you see is what it is. That's the ultrasound system in the transducer, the white thing that says LumaPHI. All the electronics of an ultrasound are there. And then you can hook it up to an Android smart device of your choice. So it's a BYOD concept. Talking to a lot of docs, they jump up and down when they find out that they can use something that's in their everyday use. This goes back to the integration question. So can we integrate in some device that they already have to carry around with them? This foundationally was the most exciting thing about this product. They love the simplicity, yes, they love the quality and all that. But it really helped them improve access because what we found was that emergency room doctors started carrying around this device in their lab coat. And when a patient entered the ER and they couldn't locate their cart-based ultrasound, or it was being used, they had access to ultrasound. We also have sports medicine physicians who are now realizing, you know what, I don't have to stay in my clinic anymore. I'm treating this team across town on the soccer field, and they actually carry this product with them. When we look at low-resource countries who can really benefit from the opportunity from fetal OB medicine, and we did a study recently at Philips where we had ultrasound being trained by midwives in a village in Uganda. Those images were sent to a central hospital, and that was 200 kilometers away. And the study looked at when to send a high-risk OB delivery to the clinic, to the hospital, and when to deliver in the village. And devices like this that have cell capability to send those images remotely, I think will change healthcare in these low-resource countries. We have to disrupt our thinking. One of the things that we did at Philips to disrupt that is we created a startup inside this large company called Philips Healthcare. And I was the first employee to run it. And I sat in this big room with nobody around me but myself. And I said, yeah, I guess this is how the startups start, right? And it was exciting because I recruited people who were different thinking, who didn't always take the most common, easy path. And it was a small team, and we launched this product in a matter of 12 months using the resources that we had within Philips, of course. But it's been an exciting ride. And it's also something that we want to disrupt the business model because we created a subscription model. We found out in talking to a lot of physicians who wanted to get access to ultrasound that I don't have thousands of dollars to buy something. but I maybe can find a couple $100 a month to subscribe, and that's exactly what we created. For $199 a month, you can subscribe. So that's our story in diagnostic ultrasound. But now let's broaden it back now to wearables and mHealth and the whole continuum. I love this picture because it really shows what is happening in the healthcare space. So we're moving patients from the center box here, which is classic hospital walls, out into lower cost environments, right? We're starting to tap into behaviors of people, healthy living. So in the world of the future, can we imagine that these devices that you use every day can be connected and have relevancy because they flow as part of a continuum of information about a patient's life? And I'm excited to think about this translates into consumer stuff in the kitchen, in the bathroom. Take that with liberty, please. And it is something that is powerful to think about how these things can come together. Is it relevant to the healthcare system? Absolutely. It fits the trends of, can I improve access? Can I make sure it's integrated? And can I improve adoption? So I want to close on this slide because it really goes back to the fundamentals of how we, as a health tech provider in a company that is involved with all the way from consumer through the healthcare cycle, see the world, and how adoption, as we talked about. The first and foremost is access. We've got to find solutions that improve access to healthcare. I gave you an example of tapping in to this platform or smart devices. In fact, you guys, I don't know if you knew this or not, you actually are part owners of the largest hardware platform in the world, if you have one of these. Smart device. And that platform, which is prevalent with absolutely everywhere, is a great way to get access, tapping into there. And this is something that is not just in the diagnostic space, this is also in the healthy living space. The second is integration. I tell you, if you're an island of information collector, you're not going to survive in the future. You've got to ride the wave. You've got to be very connected. You've got to be connected. The example I gave about the driverless cars, I tell you, if the policy comes out that driverless cars cannot use any of the roads that exist today, what's the probability of adoption? 0. If they build a system and innovate in a solution, though, that taps into it and can solve how to be integrated in that, it's going to be successful. Finally, adoption of policies. I tell you, as I started this talk, mHealth, smart devices, huge potential to resolve some of the big classic problems in healthcare. It won't go anywhere if that's all it is a technology, of course. I have to see policies and practices, security, IT, privacy. Those are real issues that have to be accounted for. But it's also about how we look at policies. How do we look at data coming in from consumers, from patients who collect it as a wearable? How does that integrate into the medical record? Is it relevant? And finally, behaviors. How do we change the curve of those that drop off? So compliance. My belief is that you got to do something that seamlessly integrates into the lifestyle, such that it's not something that adds another component of our life. Our life is complex enough, and anything added to that, people will tend to shed. So find something that fits into their paradigm of life, and you're going to be successful with that. I'm excited about the future, and it's not just about driverless cars, because I think that's there. One day I may wave at you from the back seat of a driverless car. I don't know. But it's where the technology of wearables is going. I'm a believer of it, and it's going to have a huge impact on our healthcare system. And I'm glad you're here, because this is a huge topic for us all to discuss and solve together. It's been my pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.